Hello viewers, question for you. What do you get when you cross Nazis with werewolves? You get a brand new Into the Shadows video. If you're new here, this is a show where all I do is stories of the supernatural, the scary, and the strange. So make sure to load up on silver bullets and hair clippers to make it to the end of this one. It's a long, dark tale. So the story this week is taken from a declassified report from the US government. It's been highly redacted, and we don't even know the names of the actual soldiers who were there. But there's just enough information left to tell this story. The report covers what happened to a team of army soldiers who were fighting back against the Nazis toward the end of the Second World War when they were pushing deep into German territory. At this point, the war was all but over as German forces retreated or were swept aside by the onrush of the Allies. They had been clearing town by town, and as they reclaimed territory for the Allies, they pushed into the towns close to Kehlstein house, Hitler's final mountaintop fortress retreat. The residents of the towns had begun telling the soldiers stories about a laboratory located in the Kehlstein mountains near them. From what information they could gather, they learned that there was a top-secret bunker that had previously been unknown to the Allies, and the townsfolk said there were terrible things happening out there. Howls and screams drifted down on the town at night, and people and animals would go missing, some never to be seen again. The others, unfortunately, were all found, torn apart, and partially eaten. The soldiers, having already seen the brutality of the Nazis firsthand, believed they were likely doing human experiments, and had terrified the locals with stories and superstitions. These were dark times, and nothing could be put past the Nazis. The story needed to be checked out. The commander decides to send a 20-man squad in a jeep and a crew transport truck to investigate. The bunker is about a full day's travel away, and though they left with a full day's worth of light, they were still forced to camp out on the mountain. They pulled over on the side of the road where there was enough clearing in the trees to fit both vehicles and space for some men to set up tents. This was by no means a sleepover. These troops were on high alert. They were deep in enemy territory, about to face an unknown enemy with an unknown amount of forces. This team had been specially selected from the soldiers available because, in a worst-case situation with little to no information, these were the guys you wanted to handle it. They were rugged, tough, battle-tested men, the tip of the spear aimed at the heart of Nazi evil. They made camp for the night, setting up guard shifts and tents, with the men trying to get as much sleep as they could, while staying awake enough to immediately get up and fight any potential enemy. It was a quiet night, especially eerie in this thick, unfamiliar German forest as the soldiers kept silent to hear any oncoming forces. They had not one source of light except the nearly full moon and stars, in order to stay as invisible to the enemy as possible. All was quiet, and quiet was good. It was well into the night, and a second shift had taken over the guard duty, a fresh set of eyes and ears to relieve the tired soldiers standing watch. A couple hours into the shift, and one of the soldiers thought he heard something. He had been sitting and leaning back against the side of one of the trucks, facing the tents of the sleeping soldiers, when he heard it. It almost sounded like a click, or a quiet snap, like the kind of sound a wire makes when it's stretched and snaps. He sat up straight in the darkness and took his helmet off, his ears straining to hear. It had come from the other side of the trucks, on the side facing the woods. And then he heard another sound, a different sound this time, like a bunch of air rushing through some sheets. He grabbed his rifle and stood up fast, making quick strides around the big truck to see what was going on the other side. The other guards instantly noticed that something was wrong, and the guard closest to him got up and was making a quick pace over to the truck to see what the situation was. Before he could even make it there, the guard ran out from behind the truck and yelled out to him to raise the alarm. Someone had sabotaged the truck. The tires were slashed. The previously half-asleep soldiers rushed from their tents, now wide awake, and quickly the commander broke them up into fire teams to survey the site and to find the enemy. On the side of the trucks facing the forest, the tires on both vehicles had indeed been sliced through, and most of the floodlights around the edge of camp had been disabled, their wiring slashed. The teams fanned out into the forest, trying to pierce the darkness of the woods with their flashlights, the remaining floodlights barely even illuminating the camp. Suddenly, the woods were lit up by muzzle flashes. A soldier was firing at something in the woods. The other members of his team joined him, flanking him from behind and angling their fire at the direction he was shooting. But in the bright flashes of the guns, punctuated by the total darkness between bullets, they couldn't see what it was that they were supposed to be firing at. The firing stopped and one of them asked their teammate, what was it? Where did it go? The other soldier was staring out into the darkness, and he replied, "I'm not sure. They were big and fast. I'm not even sure I hit them, but I saw one, maybe two contacts." The team started moving out again, spreading out and following the direction that they had last seen the enemy heading. If someone was out there, big and moving fast, they should be making a ton of noise. But the slow, hushed footsteps of the team was the only sound they heard. The leader raised his hand, signaling his men full stop, and they all froze, listening intently to the dead still silence of the forest. Not even a cricket made a sound they could hear. The leader had barely given the order to make their way back to camp when the quiet of the night was shattered by yelling from the direction of the camp. The men started hightailing it back to camp, as the yelling mixed in with a man screaming in pain or fear, and multiple shots rang out ahead of them. They burst through the tree line into the camp, which now had a few more floodlights going and was better lit. And in that strange orange glow, there was a chaotic scene. The fire team that had stayed behind to secure the camp had started to make repairs to the damaged floodlights, it seemed, and 4 of them were gathered on the edge of the site next to a floodlight, yelling for the others and aiming their rifles into the forest around them. As the others made it to them, it was clear that they had been attacked. There was blood all over, and the 4 men from camp were shaken. When asked by their fellow soldiers, they shared their terrifying tale. They had split their fire team in half, 3 men searching and patrolling the small camp, with 2 men working on repairing the floodlights. While one stood watch over him, a man had been underneath the floodlight repairing damaged wires. He hadn't seen what happened next, but he heard the soldier who was guarding him yell out, and before he could even get up, he heard a commotion and a big scuffle, and the soldier was crying out in pain, and shots were ringing out. The other 3 men had heard their comrades' shouts, and had headed over when they saw him get knocked down by a large man, wrestling and fighting with him. The 3 men had broken into a run, when suddenly the soldier was screaming in pain, and the large attacker was raising him up into the air, and blood was falling from the man as they fought. The 3 soldiers opened fire as they ran, fearing that their team member was already seriously wounded, and they watched with horror as the large man, who looked not much like a man at all as they got close, grabbed the soldier's now limp body in its giant arms and ran as fast as you could blink into the forest, leaving the remaining men shocked and confused under the floodlight at the edge of the trees. As the other fire teams joined them and set up a perimeter, they tried to piece together what had happened. What they had seen and what could have been seemed impossible. It had been a man that had attacked them, but not really. It had been too large, standing a couple heads taller than normal. It had been wearing a German soldier's uniform, but it hadn't carried guns or knives like a soldier. It had grabbed their man with huge hands that were clawed and sharp, tearing into him and quickly killing him. And its head was not like a regular man. It was elongated like a wolf's and seemed to be fully bearded or covered with hair. And it moved too fast for a man. It seemed like the whole event had only taken seconds, and it had taken one of their men out. No man could even say for sure that he had hit the beast. It had been as fast as a shadow, and had always been able to retreat into the darkness before anyone could line it up in their sights. These were the days before thermal imaging and laser sights, and unfortunately that meant when it was too dark, the soldiers were essentially blind. But they could hear, and as they listened, straining into the darkness, the silence was shattered by a howl, a terrifying sound that was like no dog the men had ever heard before. It was loud and seemed to reverberate the air, making the men feel sick to their stomachs. This was the howl the townspeople had been talking about, a blood-curdling cry that traveled miles down to the towns below. The soldiers couldn't say for sure that the howl was coming from the beast that attacked them, and they were praying that it was just a wolf's cry, because there was at least 2 howls emanating from the forest, one on one side of the camp and one on the other side. The night was grueling. Dead silence was punctuated by howls in the woods, the sounds seeming to come from all around them at times. It said that not a man slept that night. No one dared while the beast prowled just outside the thin shield of the floodlights. War-hardened men were heard reciting prayers, turning to religion to help deal with a thing they didn't think was possible. The men whispered it in secret to one another, with no one really wanting to talk about it. Werewolf, they all said. At daybreak, the commander gave an update. They were fighting an unknown enemy. It was fast, deadly, and smart, but it was afraid of engagement and needed to get in close to kill. With daylight now on their side, they would have the advantage, and they would cut down the enemy when it exposed itself. The trucks were beyond repair. Wires were sliced and cut underneath, which probably could be fixed, but the tires on both vehicles on the side facing the forest were all slashed, and they did not have enough spares to get either vehicle moving again. They were currently in a dead spot on the mountain and had no radio contact with home base. They had to travel on foot the rest of the way to the bunker, and a means of transport could be figured out once they had reception or once the opportunity presented itself. With the breaking of dawn, the men had stopped hearing the howling, and they believed what the commander said. It seemed like the beasts were not so bold during the day. They broke camp and headed out for the long hike, hoping they'd find some transport and could complete their mission faster. No man wanted to be out here another night. It was past noon when they started to hear it again. They had just entered a particularly dense stand of trees when the noises started. Sounds in the distance, like things moving in the trees. They couldn't see the beast or beasts. The trees were too thick, but every once in a while a man would catch a glimpse of it. A shape moving between the trunks, a glimpse of an arm or a leg. There wasn't much they could do, but they knew they were being tracked. And if there was any doubt, when the thick trees were broken up by a valley and field, they saw one, far away on the other side of the field, but standing in the open past the tree line looking at them. It was so big you could see its massive size even from that far. It was too far away for a good shot, and the soldiers marched forward through the field, preparing to fire at the first moment they could. They'd see it put its head back, not to howl, but for something else. It was smelling the air, getting a scent for them. Just when they thought they might get a good shot at it, it disappeared back into the woods in the blink of an eye. The men entered the next woods with trepidation, knowing that anything could happen. It could be setting a trap, lying in wait for them. But nothing like that happened. It was eerily quiet again, no thrashing from any trees, no signs of any beasts at all. They traveled on for hours without any events. There had been no sign of anyone coming down from the bunker yet either. No vehicle and no people had yet to use the road that the soldiers were walking down. There was no other way down the mountain, so if anyone was traveling, they would have seen them. The road cut through the side of the mountain, one side falling off far down below, the other a 20-foot tall wall that the road weaved around. The soldiers were making their way around when one of them in the middle of the troop looked up, perhaps looking up to make sure no loose rocks were going to fall on him. He had barely raised his head when something smashed into him, crushing him to the ground. It was a chaotic whirlwind as the beast, which had landed on the unfortunate soldier, rose off the body and lunged at another soldier, grabbing him in its huge claws and tearing into him. The soldiers near him opened fire, showering the creature with hot lead, spraying it with such ferocity that the soldier that he was ripping apart was mercifully hit by stray bullets, ending his torment at the hands of the beast. The creature turned snarling towards the closest soldiers, and they emptied their magazines into it as it lunged at them. The creature fell at their feet in a pile of blood and fur, not moving as other soldiers continued to fire upon it. They hadn't even had to let out their breath when there was another commotion at the back of the troop. Another creature had come crashing down from above, this one landing behind them awkwardly on some stones, and falling backwards towards the ledge, its arms and legs churning in razor movements as it tried to get its footing. The soldiers, who still had some ammo loaded, fired upon the beast, covering their team and giving them time to reload. The beast jerked and jumped 10 feet into the air as the wave of bullets hit it, twisting in the air and recoiling backwards, falling off the edge and spiraling far down below. The soldiers ran over to check that it did fall down the mountain, as others aimed their rifles at the top ledge and at the remaining body of the beast. They quickly realized that both beasts were dead, but their hearts sank when they heard it again. That howl, still so loud, still coming from all around them, front and back. How many beasts are there, they wondered. The commander ordered the men to grab the body of the beast and pull it to cover so they can regroup in safety away from the ledge high above them. It took 4 men to drag the body, and they gathered around, finally getting their first good look at the enemy that had been tormenting and hunting them. It was like a man, or maybe something that had once been a man. It was oversized and had distorted features. Though the creature itself was 8 feet tall, its limbs were still out of proportion to its body. They were long and gangly, ending in large, sharp claws at the toes and fingers. It was mostly covered in hair, or what might be called light fur, and clad in tattered, blood-stained clothes, the remains of which seemed to be a Nazi uniform that the soldiers were unfamiliar with. Its face, also covered in hair, was stretched and contorted to what could be thought to be the pointed snout of a wolf, with a long mouthful of fierce teeth. Its eyes were the most troubling part. Though lifeless, they terrified the men. They were not the eyes of a wild animal, but the same eyes as a man, the same eyes they saw when they looked at each other. It was clear that though this creature was nothing like its regular self, it had once been a human like them. It seemed that the Nazis had transformed a human into a werewolf, a regular man into a weapon of war. The soldiers knew the beasts weren't quite full werewolves, at least not yet. They were not the unstoppable killers that came out on full moons, the kind that only feared silver. The Nazis had replicated a beast of legend and nightmare, but had not created a mythical being. The soldiers hiked on, knowing they had to stop the Nazis before they got any further with their diabolical research. They knew they were close to the location the bunker was supposed to be at, and figured that was what had prompted the attack at the cliff. The sounds of the howling had picked up as well, more intimidating now than ever before, louder and more gut-churning. As the afternoon edged on, the soldiers were terrified that they would not reach the bunker by nightfall. Mythical or not, the beasts were deadly and relentless. The howling had surrounded them for hours unending as they hiked. They were exhausted, and the howls unnerved the men, but the fear of sleeping unprotected out in the woods kept them going. Suddenly, the howls stopped. Completely stopped. The men stopped as well, listening, at the ready for the attack they knew was coming. But it never came. After a few minutes, they took up hiking again, cautiously watching the tree line and treetops above them, the whole time expecting the brush to burst out with an attack from more beasts. They wound their way down the road, passing around the side of the mountain. The sun was behind the top of the mountain range, and the last fingers of light were stretching across their path as the men rounded a bend. To their elation, there was the bunker, more of a compound really, and it appeared deserted. This explained why there had been no traffic on the road. There was no one up there. The men had been ready to take this place by force, and the thought of just finding shelter and getting some sleep was almost too good to be true. As they walked past the sentry boxes guarding the road and entrance, they passed through a chain-link gate that was tossed aside and hanging off its hinges. A few of the men noticed it was pushed outward, meaning that someone had been leaving the bunker in a hurry and went right through the gate without waiting for it to be open. It was a large site, in an open area tucked into the side of the mountain. There were a scattering of buildings, large rectangular structures with a few smaller ones, set out in a half circle behind the fence and gate that walled off this section of the mountain. It was an imposing compound, with the sheer face of the mountain rising high up above all around it, the only possible entrance being the gate that they had just passed through. In the fading light, they took stock of their situation. The compound was definitely not in use. Doors and windows were broken and left open. The area was overgrown and unkept, with a scattering of trucks and vehicles around the site. The men's hope of finding transport sank as they saw that these vehicles were in far worse shape than their vehicles back down the road. Every tire was slashed, dashes were pulled apart, and wires were shredded. Some even had the gas tanks torn into, putting an end of the idea of transport. Someone, or more likely something, had totaled all of the vehicles. They had not still been able to make contact with their superiors back at base because of the stony heights of the mountains blocking the signal from their portable equipment. The good news was that a base that size would have its own equipment that was powerful enough to send a signal back over the mountain, if it was still in one piece. The relay was easy to find. The antenna and satellite dishes were clustered around one of the smaller buildings. The commander sent a squad over with the communication expert to get it operational and send out a message to base camp for transport and to update their allies. The rest of the men got together, flushing out a building near the communications building. It was only a single-story building, but it had more than enough space for the men to rest inside, and it was a building that could easily be locked down and secure against the enemies outside. They cleared it out and got to work setting it up as a camp for the night. They settled on a series of windowless rooms at the end of a hallway. The walls were solid cinder blocks, and there was only one way to get at the men, through the long hallway. If a beast tried to come down, they would be able to take it down before it was even halfway. The rooms appeared to be storage, with a windowless door and a collection of filing cabinets, chairs, and scientific instruments inside of them. The soldiers cleared themselves space to lie down, and split up into 4 groups of 4 or 5, with one group standing guard and switching out with the others. The exhausted and tormented men were ready for sleep, and were happy to actually have 4 walls around them, even if clawed beasts stalked them outside of those walls. One of the soldiers puts a chair under the door handle of his room since it didn't have a lock. Certainly not as good security as the armed guards in the hallway, and it might not stop a beast as strong and large as they had encountered, but he was trying anything just to put his terrified mind at ease, even a little bit more. The soldiers drift off to sleep, the still darkness of the night shattered every so often by a blood-curdling howl. It seemed to pass through the walls and resonate into the men, waking them up and terrifying them. It was into the morning hours, and all had been quiet for a little while, when suddenly there was an enormous crashing sound, waking all of the soldiers in every room. The guards who were up barely had time to react before the screaming started. Many men, an entire room was screaming and yelling. They rushed to the room and tried opening the door, but it was stuck shut. No matter how much they pushed into it, it was jammed on the other side. The soldiers could do nothing as they heard the roaring and yelling inside, the sounds of things being thrown around the room and smashed into walls. This went on for half a minute, the men on the outside frantically slamming against the door, trying to get inside. Suddenly it was quiet from the room. The only sound now the confused voices from the men in the hallway, and the sounds of the men hammering at the door, trying to get in. With a snapping crash, the door gave way, breaking apart the chair under the handle that had been stopping the door from opening, and it tumbled the men into the room. What they saw inside was a horror show. Men torn apart, bodies and furniture tossed like matchsticks about the room. Light from the full moon shone into the room from a gaping hole in the ceiling. A beast had managed to avoid their defenses and slaughtered 5 defenseless men while they slept, tearing back the roof and attacking them before they even had a chance to respond. The extent of the injuries made it clear that no man had ever had a chance of surviving, and all those who had been in the room were lifeless. The soldiers had thought they were safe inside, but as a blood-curdling howl swept through the air again, they realized how wrong they were. Sleep was now all but impossible for the men, and they resigned themselves to lying in the dark, tormented by howls, waiting for daylight. The men guarding the front was standing out in the darkness, watching shadows move in the distance, and trying not to let fear get the best of him, when suddenly lights pierced through the black of night on the road that curved ahead of the mountains. He ran inside to tell the men, who scrambled to get up and ready to face this new turn of events. The guard got back to his post in time to see the lights follow up the road to the gate and past it, driving slowly around the compound. There were 2 sets of lights, and the roar of a diesel tank engine coming from the back of them. The vehicles pulled up to the end of the compound, facing the communications building and the building the men were at. The lights from the vehicles shone into the building, making it hard for the men inside to see who it was. The men gathered around the windows and doors facing the vehicles, hiding from sight and preparing for a firefight. They hadn't called for backup, so it was likely that these were Nazi forces, perhaps retreating to hole up at the bunker or for some other purpose. It was likely that they didn't even know the soldiers were there in the building. The men crouched by the windows, holding their breath. A fight against men would be bad enough. A fight against a tank would be devastating. All they could do was pray that they were not discovered. To their shock, out of the dark, they heard a voice over the loudspeaker. It was an Englishman, an American it sounded like. His voice rolled out to them in the darkness, shouting that he was looking for their platoon, and if the men were out there to come out and identify themselves. He identified himself over the loudspeaker, though none of the men recognized the name. The commander of the soldiers in the building ran to the farthest window and shouted out at the men in the trucks, asking why they were there and who sent them. If this was a ploy by the enemy, then at least they wouldn't know the entire team's position. The man on the loudspeaker told them he was there as support, that they had sent a scout out when they failed to make radio contact. When the scout found the sabotaged truck and the floodlights, they had headed back to main base, calling in for support as soon as they had reception. The man on the loudspeaker explained that they were the support. The commander was satisfied and shouted at the man that there were enemy forces in the immediate area and that they were glad to see them. They would come right out at the front of the building. The soldiers in the building gathered their team at the entrance and prepared to cross the grounds to the trucks some 70 feet away. They moved out of the building in position, rifles aimed outward to the dark as they exited, covering both sides as they headed to the trucks. The last man was only a few feet out the door when a howl ripped through the air. Suddenly, troops in the back of one truck started firing their rifles over the heads of the men running towards them, as a turret on the back of the other swung to the left side and was firing, spewing hot liquid flame in a huge stream. The reinforcements had brought a large flamethrower mounted to the bed of the truck, and in that spray of fiery death, they could see the shape of a beast twist and jerk. It was engulfed by flame as it had tried to charge at the men from behind one of the buildings. The men moving towards the truck still had more to worry about, though. The men on the trucks had been shooting over their heads, and as they turned to cover their tail and see what the other soldiers were shooting at, a beast jumped down from the roof. It landed only meters away from one of the men on the end, and as that soldier is raising his rifle to fire it, the creature, lightning fast, grabs him by the arm and swings him into 2 other soldiers, tearing that unlucky soldier's arm off as he sent smashing into his comrades, crumpling the 3 men in one mass. It got no further attacking though. The creature was out in the open, and 2 groups of soldiers now converged their fire on it, cutting it down in a hail of bullets. As they made it to the trucks and clambered on board, carrying and dragging their wounded, the new soldiers struggled to comprehend what had just happened. With the entire group now packed into trucks and on red alert, the 2 commanders quietly spoke together as the light from flames danced around the darkness. It only took a minute before the order to head back was given, and the convoy turned and drove out fast, passing through the gate in a flurry as the flames spread through the long uncut grass in the compound, already having reached one of the buildings and setting the exterior alight. By the time they turned the corner, the compound shone bright with flames, all the buildings ablaze and the fire reflecting off the face of the mountain. The last thing the report says is when they were driving away, some soldiers reported hearing howls echoing down the mountain as they hightailed it back down to civilization. But when the Allies went back to check, they found nothing but a burnt-out facility. No bodies, no wolfmen, and no evidence survived the fires to tell what the Nazis were doing out there. and maybe that's for the best. But the stories of the Wolfman persist in the Kehlstein Mountains, and to this day the area is treated with fear, and only the most foolish venture up the mountain. Few are said to have ever returned. And that's all we know. It never came to light what the Nazi base in the mountains was used for. Let me know what you guys think of the story in the comments section below, and if you were able to make it this far, hit that like and subscribe button. I do at least weekly videos with content just like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.